Today we have Vladislava Stankova from the University of Enna in Italy. She is a PhD student working on topics of tourist economics, and today we'll present a paper on the impact of COVID on the tourist demand.
Exactly. Yes.
So thank you very much for being here, Vladi. Hello, Romina. Thank you very much for being here, Vladi, and coming.
Thank you very much for introducing me, and thank you very much for having me today for this seminar session. I really appreciate that. And let me share the screen, so I will start with the presentation. Okay. So today I will present the work I was working on during the second year of my PhD studies at the Università Kore di Enna with my supervisor, Professor Scuderi. And this paper is entitled as Travelers' Vulnerability in the COVID-19 Crisis. Should we even care? So we were trying to answer this question: should we even care about the travelers' vulnerability in the COVID-19 pandemic, in the COVID-19 crisis? So today we will first talk about the research question. So I will present the research question, then I will introduce the evolution of the concept of vulnerability in tourist context, present research hypotheses, present the data, the research methodology. We'll then comment the results of the quantitative study, and then give some conclusion marks. And so the research question arose from the concern that prolonged period of travelers' vulnerability might exert an influence on tourist economy, especially on tourist supply side. And as you can see from these two pictures, the first one was taken at the airport of International Airport in Vienna on October 10, 2020, so in the pandemic time in Europe, and at 3 p.m. And 6 months later, this is the second picture, was taken at International Airport Milan Malpensa on April 4 at 11 a.m. Both hours are quite a rushy hours, not the peak hours, but usually these airports are very crowded. So they think that the travelers' vulnerability in the COVID-19 time might be actually very important to be addressed. And so we spent some time to understand what literature says about the perceived travelers' vulnerability, and then we were quantitatively assessing what are the factors influencing on it, so that we might be prepared for future perceived heightened periods of travelers' vulnerability, and have some keys, or to have some possibilities to address it, answers. The concept of vulnerability in the literature from various fields usually refers to a certain group of people or products or systems because of some constitutional characteristics which make certain group of people more vulnerable than others. But it's externally assessing the vulnerability. So we assess externally, in this case, the vulnerability because of some characteristics of people, product, systems, such as age with regard to people, or that product is damaged, so it's more vulnerable than the normal product system, than the normal products, the same for the systems. In different fields, the vulnerability assessed, for instance, in human sciences, a state of mind induced by exposure to risk. In social sciences, it is defined as the inability to function according to society values. In natural sciences, like the likelihood that the product might be misused. failing to perform its primary function or its purpose. And economic vulnerability is the possibility that an economy might experience unsustainable conditions. So all of these definitions have a common ground, that they externally assess a certain group of people as more vulnerable due to their constitutional characteristics. In tourism, however, there is a widespread literature on vulnerability linked to destination. So at the destination level, addressing the vulnerability at the destination level. And the vulnerability at the destination level is linked to the destination's susceptibility to harm or exposure to risk due to characteristics of the destination, and because of the unequal distribution of power or resources. Let's think of coastal destinations, which are more exposed to natural hazards, or poorer countries, which are more exposed to terrorism. In contrast to other researches, we concentrated on the vulnerability linked to individuals. Scholars commonly refer to a vulnerable person being under vulnerable situation. And as we see, Lima in 2018, for instance, defined travelers as the weaker party, so more vulnerable party in contracts on travel services, as they have in their possession, they possess less information than the businesses. And when the travelers are also elder people or people with mental infirmity, this might even increase their vulnerability in contracts on travel services. So this is still some kind of static definition of vulnerability based on some characteristics. On the other hand, Vassler and Kutejníková in 2020 brought to the light a new vision of vulnerability, which stems from the lived experience. And so the vulnerability might be, any group might be vulnerable according to them, because the vulnerability comes to the light when a person's sense of soundness or integrity is disrupted by a challenge to which we are unable to respond. So it's a more dynamic definition of the vulnerability when the individuals are assessing themselves, how they feel vulnerable in the travel context. But it also admits some kind of positive vulnerability, which enhance the memorability of the trip and promote people to travel again or to go again to the same destination. Let's think of a group of travelers which are in Cuba, dragged by locals to some tiny little pub to dance salsa. And so in that situation, they define them more vulnerable, very vulnerable. In the study of Vassler and Kutejníková, it was one example. And so there was this sense of soundness that they felt that they lost their control. And because that situation was very challenging and they could not answer to it, but it was a positive lived experience and enhanced their eagerness to travel again. But we need to adapt this definition to the context of extreme events such as the COVID-19 to describe the perceived traveler's vulnerability, because we start from the point that the sense of soundness for the travelers is their ability to perform their primary function, which is to travel. And that ability to perform this primary function was challenged by the extreme events like the COVID-19, but not only because of its intrinsic characteristics like the risk of contracting the virus, but also some external factors, like secondary factors, like the measures, for instance, which were imposed on travel, so that were endangering our travel during the COVID-19, or rendering it more difficult. So also the experiences such as being stranded in foreign country, for instance, during the COVID-19, or losing friends or family, these kind of experiences would very hardly induce a positive effect on travel willingness, in contrast to Vassler and Kutejníková. And because of this, also the secondary effects of COVID-19 on our travel behavior, the willingness to travel, this travel behavior, or the perception of being able to travel might turn into a perceived impossibility to travel. So we adapted the definition of Vladislava Stankova to the extreme events, so that the perceived traveler's vulnerability in the presence of rare extreme events, such as the COVID-19 or global crisis, might be defined as the degree to which tourists and travelers perceive that an exogenous shock has interrupted their capacity to execute their primary function, which is to travel, owing to individual specific but also external factors that do not have to be intrinsic to the event itself. In contrast to Vladislava Stankova, we also account for the individual specific characteristics, because, for instance, the economic characteristics, socioeconomic characteristics are important for any crisis assessment. And travel avoidance is a proxy in our study for the perceived traveler's vulnerability, since it captures perfectly the perception of the situation and how the situation influences on our decision to travel or to not travel, so to avoid travel. And we wanted now to move to the quantitative part of the study. So we were wondering to understand what influences the travelers' perceived vulnerability in COVID-19 during the COVID-19 time. So this travel avoidance, which is a part of the travel behavior. There's a widespread literature on the travel behavior, and we concentrate on this specific factor of it. First, we hypothesized that being more responsive to travel reopening, so have this very high interest in travel, decreases travel avoidance, or there's the vulnerability perception that we cannot somehow exert our primary function. On the other hand, the second research question is that the perception of COVID-19, we wanted to understand whether or not there exerts some influence on travel avoidance. So we hypothesized that being more aware about the situation of COVID-19 increases the vulnerability of travelers, the travel avoidance. And a third research question was that being more responsive to travel measures, so being ready to resign from trip if there were some travel measures put in place at the stations, airports, and so on and so forth, increases the traveler's vulnerability, because although these measures were meant to guarantee the safety of travelers, they were very difficult, very hard to meet these restrictions, these requirements, as they were internationally quite uncoordinated, and sometimes it was very difficult to actually satisfy these requirements to travel, like having a COVID-19 test negative 48 hours before the trip. And we also accounted for some social demographic factors and socio-economic factors. So to build these four latent variables, or these four constructs, we employed the explanatory factor analysis on the questionnaire data, which were collected in Uruguay. And the questionnaire was submitted in Uruguay with the Likert point scale answers ranging from strongly disagree to strongly agree in the December-January 2020-2021, when the summer vacation were starting and some restrictions were partially lifted, restrictions on travel. And then we employed the factor scores from the explanatory factor analysis in our multi-regression analysis, together with the control variables. So these are the main variables used in our multi-regression analysis then. And so we see that the construct of travelers' vulnerability was assessed through observed variables, which were the answers to the question on whether or not people were avoiding traveling. Perception of COVID-19, again, is the construct I mentioned, which was measured through other observed items, answers to the questions, or the positioning of the individuals towards some statement about the COVID-19. Responsiveness to travel safety measures is the construct, is the dimension that was measured through the observed variables regarding the travelers' attitude towards the travel safety measures. So if they would resign from the trip, if they were safety measures put in place some before the trip, so submitting a negative coronavirus test, or in the country of arrival, like quarantine. And responsiveness to travel reopening was measured through the answers to the question on whether or not people were planning any vacation, if they were leisure travel reopening, such as store reopening, restaurant reopening, and essential travel reopening, so social at the end of social distancing, or restrictions lifting, and restoration of international flights. To preserve the questionnaire, the survey design, we split the data into the groups of items they were meant to measure. They were split according to the dimension they were meant to measure. So there were 4 groups of items referring to travel vulnerability, perception of COVID-19, and then responsiveness to travel reopening and responsiveness to travel measures. And to perform the explanatory factor analysis, we first check for the factorability of the data, if the data were suitable for the explanatory factor analysis. So we inspected the correlation matrices, and we observed that 2 variables were not correlating at all. But we know that in explanatory factor analysis, much is given to the theory and the interpretation of the data. So these 2 variables were, according to Neuberger 2020, referring to travel risk perception rather than perception of COVID-19. And in the case of responsiveness to measures and responsiveness to reopening, we see that the variables were correlating, although not very with the great correlations, but it was acceptable according to the acceptable level of correlation. We also performed the Kaiser-Meyer-Olkin test for the factorability of the data, to check for the sampling adequacy, and Barlott's test of sphericity to reject the null hypothesis of the orthogonality in our data. And the results were satisfactory, so we could reject the null hypothesis of the orthogonality of our variables, and the sampling adequacy was also good. So these are the results from our explanatory factor analysis. And we see that only 1 factor was loading to travelers' vulnerability construct or dimension. And this was also the case of the perception of COVID-19. Only 1 factor was loading to perception of COVID-19. But on the other hand, in case of the responsiveness to travel measures, 2 factors were loading to this dimension. 1 referring to responsiveness to more light measures, which are those required before the trip, before the travel. So like submitting a negative COVID-19 test, or filling in the health form. And the second factor was reflecting on the responsiveness to travel measures with relation to hard measures, like those required at the destination of arrival, like going to quarantine or undergo a health examination. In case of the responsiveness to travel reopening, 2 factors were loading also in this case to responsiveness to travel reopening. And the first factor was relating to responsiveness or interest in leisure reopening, so store reopening, restaurant reopening. And the second factor was loading to essential reopening, so the distancing and restriction and flight restoration. And finally, we move to the results of our analysis, and we see that in case of the factor of responsiveness to essential reopening and responsiveness to leisure reopening, only the factor of responsiveness to essential reopening presented a coefficient which was statistically significant, though the negative direction, like the negative sign, is very important, as it somehow implies that the responsiveness, the eagerness to essential reopening, the eagerness to travel decreases the traveler's vulnerability, the travel avoidance. We know that during the COVID-19 pandemic, the main objective of all politicians was to reduce the mobility, and but at the same time, it is very important that the travelers keep this spirit of traveling high, this spirit of this interest of traveling high, so that in the recovery time this might be extremely helpful because it reduces the vulnerability. Perception of COVID-19 presented statistically significant and positive coefficients, so that the awareness of the situation of COVID-19 actually increases the travel avoidance, or this perceived traveler's vulnerability, this feeling that we cannot travel. And also for this, there are some very important this results implies that, for instance, media exert a very important influence on us, and might also indirectly increase our vulnerability in the COVID-19, or in the case of any extreme event crisis. And with regard to responsiveness to hard and light safety measures, we see that those coefficients were statistically significant or opposite. And this is very interesting because while the hard safety measures, like the responsiveness to hard safety measures, decreases the traveler's vulnerability, this might be explained by the fact that while the light safety measures are required before the trip, there is a lot of uncertainty on if we will be able to conclude our trip and to reach our destination. And where on the other hand, the hard safety measures, once we arrive to the destination, we are required to stay in quarantine. So that does not compromise the traveler's ability to travel, where on the other hand, the life safety measure do. So when we look at the control variables, we might observe that only there are only the statistically significant results for the dummy variable of gender and age. So it might be explained that we can interpret this data that in contrast to men, being a female increases the perceived travel vulnerability, travel avoidance, and that being in contrast to other age group, being a middle-aged experienced traveler, might reduce the traveler's perceived vulnerability and the travel avoidance. On the other hand, income was not statistically significant. It might probably reflect the fact that for people in Uruguay, it is essential to travel and they need to move, and regardless of the income. So to conclude, we have to say that although to protect the public health, the aim of government was to avoid traveling, so also the measures were very hard to meet, but the avoidance of travel and the vulnerability of passengers might be very dangerous, at the prolonged period of travel inactivity, of travel avoidance might exert an influence on tourism businesses. And as for instance, there is a lot of small businesses that rely on revenues and rather than profits, and once their cash flows are halted, it's very difficult to survive. So the traveler's vulnerability, the period of traveler's vulnerability goes hand in hand with the business continuity. And fixing the vulnerability might take time, because in the meanwhile, the people might reflect on their lifestyle, change their lifestyle. So might, for instance, reduce their travel frequency or give up for long haul travels. So these changes might be very dangerous then for tourism supply. and everyone does need to do the part. So to reduce this risk perception with the COVID-19 during the other situations future, I hope that there won't be any. Inaccurate information, providing accurate information is very important, and not to try to aggravate the psychophysical conditions of travelers. It is suggested to soothe them, because it's already really high, this perception of all those risks from the dangerous situations. And politicians should try to make the policies more coordinated at the international level, so there is not a chaos at the airports and denying of boarding for the airplanes. All those situations render us very vulnerable, and we might reflect on our willingness to travel during such very difficult organizational problems. And the last important thing to mention is that also tourist supply and politics are important part of or important actors to help tourists and travelers to stay interested in traveling during the COVID-19 by reassuring them that they will reopen the leisure travel services and the essential travel services properly, so that they create some kind of environment of confidence that might be extremely helpful in the recovery phase. So these are the conclusions that were dragged from the quantitative analysis, from the data that we had at our disposal. And thank you very much. I hope that you have any comments or questions. I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Vladi. Very nice presentation, and we open them for questions, comments. If somebody is there that wants to say something.
Hello. Sorry, I want to congratulate and I want to say sorry because I had a problem and I couldn't attend the full presentation, but I'm really interested in your paper. So if you can't send to me or to the group, I can read it and because it's very interesting for me. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you. I'm very happy that you are interested.
Vladi, Victoria worked on the data collection of this paper, so it could be nice if you can interact with her. Probably you can construct a paper together, no? Any other questions?
Yes, it will be great for me.
Yes, of course, we. Yes.
Any other comment? Excuse me.
No, I just wanted to answer to Victoria just by saying that we presented this work at the conference, IATE conference. So this is still a draft. We still are thinking of submitting this paper to some journal. So of course that we want to collaborate also with you, because you gave us the data, so that's very nice. And I will now speak to Raffaele, and we'll try to connect with you on this.
Yeah, we can keep contact so we can work about it. Thank you very much. Congratulations.
Thank you.
For being interested in that data. It's so nice. It's so nice.
Yes, just want to say one thing in a rush. This is, of course, a preliminary version, and we are still working to improve it. Thanks also to Gabriel. So it's yes, it's just it's the beginning. So the final paper will be refined further, of course. Yes, thank you also to Gabriel.
Vladi, did you saw the other papers that we constructed with this data?
Yes, I saw one paper. But
we have other two.
Other two, I didn't see.
We have two more. So probably Victoria can send you the references of this paper. Two are published, and one is still under construction. You are finishing, no?
Yes.
Just to have an idea. Vladi, what do you think about the planning and political implications of your results? What can you say, for example, for a policymaker about what your work, what can be derived from the work in this sense?
Yes, thank you. This is, I think that the policy implications are very clear because the traveler's vulnerability is not taken into the consideration. Is the main objective of politicians. To avoidance of travel is the main objective, but no one cares about how this avoidance might be dangerous actually in the recovery phase and how this avoidance might affect the supply side. Because we know that although the demand is recovering very well, we know that there are some visible marks on the supply side of all those changes all those changes that happened, all these, I would say, understaffed air companies and all those issues that stems from the COVID-19 on the supply side. So once the first one is to actually take into consideration the travel as avoidance and also trying to not to aggravate it during the period of similar future crises. So trying to address it with the good with this environment of confidence, creating environments of confidence with travelers, ensuring them that everything will restart properly and on time, and that there will be the restoration, and helping the businesses, but timely, not timely, because I think that the efficient help is very important in this. I think that in Uruguay it was efficient, that the businesses were well helped during the COVID-19, but in other countries there was past several months once the politician aids arrived to the companies, and the companies in the meanwhile bankrupt or could not survive. So that affected very much their continuity. So I think that these are the most important policy implications, and also to render the measures, the travel measures, more coordinated across the countries, because we saw the chaos at the airports, at the stations, and we know that many people were worried about these travel measures. So
more questions or comments? Do you find similar works, Vladi?
yeah.
Do you find some similar studies, or is the only one that you find that you know the data collection, or are there other studies about the impact of COVID on the demand?
There are other studies, but examining the travel behavior. So not specifically on travel avoidance. That is, I think, the innovation of this work, that we are just taking into consideration travel avoidance, which is a part of travel behavior. And so, yeah, the main limitation on the other hand is that it considered only the Uruguayan population, but similar other works could be also performed in other country on other data, and to see if we will get the similar results.
Good. Somebody else? Nobody have more questions or comments? Martin Spreckman.
Okay, Stanislava, a very interesting presentation. I like your research methodology, your empirical approach. I will name two events out of the field of the guided seminar, which were the earthquake and tsunami in Banda Aceh in 2004 and the earthquake and tsunami in Japan in 2011. So bearing that in mind, my first question would be also, what would be your recommendation for future extreme events like the COVID-19 pandemic? That's one question. Second question would be, I may have skipped the slide, but why do you use an orthogonal transformation? And third, I would like to know if you in any form controlled by political leaning, because people tend to follow the rules according to their beliefs. So thank you, and that's it.
Yeah. So thank you very much for all your comments, for your question. I will now respond to the first one. So I wanted to, it's very interesting, yeah, the recommendation that I will give for future events. That's very difficult, but I try to address this argument from a bigger vision. So not only linked to the COVID-19, but I actually studied the COVID-19 as an extreme rare event. So in our full paper, it's possible to find the definitions of what is the extreme rare events. And it really has to be a very big event, such as a war, such as the COVID-19, which endanger our health or the human lives. So in the main recommendation for other future events is once again to pay attention on how vulnerable travelers feel and how they assess themselves as vulnerable. So this can give us a lot of directions. It can gives us the direction of what to do now and how to react as politicians, for instance, or businesses in the recovery phase. So then I, of course, for the third question, I want to react that it is true. People usually do what they want or how they feel, and they are trying to observing the rules. They are trying to observing the measures, but they are very eager to travel. But there is also a group of people that are extremely attentive to what are the measures, what are the restrictions, and try to obey these rules. And so both of these are very important. Both of these groups are very important to address those who are very obeying to rules and staying at home and trying to meet all the travel measures might become very vulnerable because, for instance, they obey the rules, but on the other hand, because of some confusion at the airport, they are not able to board on the flight because, for instance, they didn't met the right policy measures, measures because the air companies were not updated on the measures. So they might become very vulnerable in the afterwards because of these lived experiences. And those who are eager to travel too much, that do not care about the situation, just travel, and because they just follow their feelings, are very important also for the recovery phase, because we will need them once everything will be finished and the tourist needs to recover. But of course that both of these groups might be addressed in the proper way. And the second question, I'm sorry, but I didn't understand. Can you repeat it?
Yeah, sure. About the transformation. I mean, there could be, you could use another one, but it's just.
Transformation in which sense? Sorry.
In the explanatory factor analysis.
In the explanatory factor analysis. Explanatory factor analysis, we let's just say that we tried different ways to work with the data, and the explanatory factor analysis was the most appropriate because the data speaks by themselves in the explanatory factor analysis. We also tried the principal component analysis and the Cronbach-Alpha. The results are very similar, but the explanatory factor analysis on this data are most proper. Yes.
Just one clarification. Are you meaning the transformation before data handling, that is before putting the data into the component analysis? Hello? Who was talking? Martin?
Yes, I hear. I'm thinking. Yes, give me a second, please.
Yes, no worries.
What is doing, Martin?
No, afterwards.
No.
I mean, after you do the experiment, when you do the confirmatory.
Okay, I got it. How we extrapolated the factor scores from the explanatory factor analysis and used the factor scores in the multiple regression analysis. The factor scores were extrapolated from the explanatory factor analysis by adding the regression arguments to the factanal command using the R software.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so today was rare because we have very few people in the seminar. I don't know, maybe summer is arriving, or the World Cup. No, next Sunday I will start my leave for vacations until the end of the year because we have la Copa del Mundo. No? So, Vladi, thank you very much for the presentation. I remember I saw your this work before, and I think you have improved a lot. I think, and so I was suggesting Rafaele strongly that you have to contact the Victoria. Victoria, you have to contact Vladi. Because I think you can have some synergies and cooperation because you are working on the same, more or less, no, Rafael, more or less the same topic, and Victoria will be in Sassari in Sardinia for one semester, so this could be a good opportunity to have I don't know, to have some meetings.
Definitely.
Okay. Probably, Rafael, you can also invite Victoria for a seminar or something like this, if it is possible, no? At
Yes.
Enna.
That can be a very nice idea. We will work on that for sure.
Yeah, and the other thing is that we have, Professor Scuderi is very busy because he is the boss, but he's the boss of everything, more or less. I will see you in the top of Sicily someday. Now, what I'm thinking also is it could be interesting, Raffaele, to construct a project on these topics. So have a look, Vladi, also, if there are some calls for projects for to finance some project, because it could be interesting. I think it's a very important topic in tourism, and it is very few workers still now. No?
Yes, exactly. Just very few works on very important topic and very few works on it. Yes, you're right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very important topic. Yes.
So I hope we will see you in the next workshop, because I said, Raffaele, next workshop will be in Spain, so this time will be close
to us,
closer to you. So if for just to take a note for those that just remember that the workshop will be from 25 to 27 October. Okay, in Jaén. Jaén, this is Andalusia, in the south of Italy. Okay, Pablo Casares is organizing this with us. Okay.
Okay. Very nice.
Thank you very much to everybody. I think this is more or less the last seminar this year, because we will